Well, welcome everyone. I just want to go over the virtual meeting guidelines again as we're back to that. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Please do not unmute and mute yourself. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and the window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Kate White via the chat box, kwhite, W-H-I-T-E, @cps.org, or 857-702-3658. Next, I'll read the accessibility statement. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Kate White via the chat box, kwhite @ctbs.org, or 857-702-3658. All right, let's go around. Who's going to do the roll today with me?
Steve, I'm going to do it. It's Ann.
All right, Ann, you want to go ahead?
All right. MassDOT Chair.
Steve Wolfer, representing Acting Secretary and CEO of MassDOT, Jamie Tesler.
MassDOT Seat 2.
Good morning, John Bouchard, MassDOT Deputy Chief Engineer, representing Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver.
MassDOT Highway.
John Romano here.
MBTA. Massport. MAPC.
Good morning. This is Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Thanks. MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning, Brian Kane, MBTA Advisory Board, representing 176 cities and towns, contributing $180 million to the T in fiscal 22, which starts today. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Advisory Council.
Such a tough act to follow. This is Leonard Diggins from the Advisory Council.
City of Boston, BTD.
Bill Conroy here.
Thanks. City of Boston, BPDA.
Hi, Jim Fitzgerald, BPDA, representing Mayor Janey, City of Boston.
At-large city, City of Everett. Okay, at-large city, City of Newton.
Good morning, David Kozis, representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller in the City of Newton.
At-large town, Town of Arlington.
Daniel Amstutz, Town of Arlington, representing Select Board Chair Steve DeCourcy.
Thanks. At-large town, Town of Brookline.
Todd Corrine, representing Select Board Chair Heather Hamilton in the Town of Brookline.
Inner Core, City of Somerville.
Good morning, Tom Bent, City of Somerville, representing Mayor Joe Curtatone in the Inner Core.
Magic Town of Acton. Okay, Metro West, City of Framingham.
Thatcher Keyser, representing Mayor Spicer, Framingham Metro West.
North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Darlene Wynn, representing the North Shore Task Force on behalf of Mayor Michael Cahill.
Thank you. North Suburban, City of Woburn. Okay, South Shore Coalition, Town of Rockland. Okay, Southwest Advisory Committee, Town of Medway. Okay, Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Neponset Chamber.
Good morning, Tom O'Rourke from the Town of Norwood, representing Trick.
Thanks. And FHWA? And FTA? Okay, that calls the roll.
All right, thanks, Am. And as I said, welcome, everybody. We're on to next agenda, item, which is chair's report. I do not have a chair's report, so why don't we move to agenda item 3, which is the executive director's report. Tegan, go ahead.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone. And thanks to those of you who also attended the UPWP meeting prior to this. We kind of ran right up against the meeting. I'll try to keep my comments relatively brief, but I wanted to highlight some great events that are happening in July. Just because it's summertime does not mean that we are slowing down too much. So yesterday we had a special meeting with the Inner Core Committee, the ICC Transportation Group, co-hosted with MEPC. And at that meeting, we discussed the bus network redesign process with Mass DOT and MPO staff. And it was a really great, really robust conversation. And thank you to those of you who participated in that. And if you want to learn more about it, feel free to reach out to us and we can, to Kate White, and we can provide you with some more information. We also have a regularly scheduled Inner Core Committee Transportation meeting, the summer meeting, and that will be on Wednesday, July 14th from 9 to 11 a.m. But before that, there's another event on Friday, July 9th at 10 a.m. and that will be the next Pilot Transit Working Group meeting. And at that meeting, we'll also have kind of an interesting and special topic. We'll have Rich Farr, who's the Executive Director of Rabbit Transit in York, Pennsylvania. It's actually a pun, it's Rabbit Transit. And he'll discuss experiences facilitating regionalization of transit and consolidation of transit agencies and the kind of related successes and challenges of doing so. And the reason why we're having this guest is because the regionalization of transit is a topic of interest for several of the transit working group participants. So we hope that this would provide some interesting lessons for them to consider and just yield some interesting conversation about those participants. So if you're interested, please sign up. We'll also provide some general MPO updates on the UPWP, the Unified Planning Work Program, as well as the PPP, the Public Participation Plan. And we'll also be talking about the coffee chat sessions or the sort of the short group chat sessions that we have with Pilot Transit Working Group members in May. So if you have any questions about that, please contact Michelle Scott or Sandy Johnston. And then also we'll be hosting a webinar with the Massachusetts APA Transportation Committee. I'm sorry, I do not recall the date for that right now, and I don't have a note on it, but you'll see communications about it. And I should know because I will be talking at it. It's called From Freeway Revolts to the Future, the History of MPOs. And that will be an event where I'll talk about how MPOs were created in the time of the Freeway Revolts protests, and that we were created to promote regional cooperation and regional transportation planning. So we will also have a Q&A after that short presentation with a board member, Daniel Amstutz, as well as Sujatha Krishnan from the Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission, CMRPC. And we will have a nice panel discussion to talk about present and future activities of MPO. So those are the meetings. I do want to highlight that all of those meetings are still being held completely remotely at this point. And I just want to make a quick comment about that for your consideration. As many of you, hopefully all of you know, Governor Baker's state of emergency for COVID-19 expired on June 15th. In those days approaching the expiration of the state of emergency, we didn't know if exemptions for open meeting law were going to be extended. So we didn't know if we were going to need to have a quorum in person if they hadn't officially been extended. So we planned to host the committee meetings that we had last Thursday as hybrid meetings. And that gave up the opportunity for in-person attendance. That was the A&F committee and the TIP project costs ad hoc committee. I think it's really important that I emphasize that because a few of you did attend, our planning for those meetings were not intended to represent an ideal kind of long-term framework for how we operate hybrid meetings. It was really kind of a response on quick notice. So for the board's information, we would need to do some extensive planning and improve our process if we were going to successfully hold hybrid meetings in the future. And I'm happy to provide you with a summary of how those went at some time and what the pros and cons were. And 3 of your fellow board members did attend as well, one of them. So now that we have the extension in place until April 1st, 2022, our default at the moment is to continue to hold our meetings virtually. including the ones I just mentioned. But I would ask you all as board members to just consider and confirm that this default is your expectation. And if you have an interest in transitioning anytime before the extension expires to a different meeting format, we should really start discussing that as soon as possible. And regardless, we're going to need to start planning for April 1st if we do wait until then to change any of our meeting format. So I just wanted to throw that out there. We'll have a shorter meeting today, but a very important one, because we're going to ask you, with input from the A&F Committee, the Administration and Finance Committee, to vote on CTPS's state fiscal year 2022 operating budget. Today is the first day of the state fiscal year. And for those of you who are not familiar, because we CTPS are staff to the Boston Region MPO, you, the board, approve our operating budget every year by around the beginning of the state fiscal year. And then we'll ask you to also vote on some meeting minutes and a work scope for the MBTA. The next meeting will be on July 15th, and that will be preceded by another UPWP committee meeting. And that will be the date that we will present the draft federal fiscal year 2022 UPWP for your consideration to release for public comment. So we certainly hope to see you all there as well. And thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Steve.
Anyone have any questions for Tegan? I don't see any. So thank you, Tegan. And I believe Kate put in the chat the date that that meeting that Tegan's speaking at. So please take note of that. All right, we'll move on to agenda item 4, which are public comments. Are there any members of the public that would like to address the MPO today? Representative Barber, I see your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't able to unmute, but thank you for taking public comment this morning, and I appreciate, of course, all of the work of the MPO. I'm Christine Barber, state representative from the 34th Middlesex District, which is Somerville and Medford. I'm broadly speaking in relation to agenda item 8, the CTPS operating budget this morning. I wanted to come to before the MPO as the GLX phase 1 is nearing completion. And I'm really grateful that MassDOT has been able to build that project within their budget, especially given the difficulties of the past year and a half. With the GLX phase 1's announcement last week that the project is in solid financial shape and has adequate contingency, I wanted to come before the MPO as I have in the past. As you remember, of course, the MPO voted to flex federal highway funds for the Green Line extension phase 2, which would be the stop at Mystic Valley Parkway or Route 16. And over a number of years, of course, greatly appreciate the MPO's ongoing and very strong support for that project. So again, as you remember, when phase 1 of the Green Line extension was facing financial difficulties, the MPO was asked to reprogram that funding from phase 2 to phase 1 of the project. And at the time of that vote, MassDOT made a commitment to the MPO to start the environmental review process for GLX phase 2 by the end of 2016 and carry out the MEPA process for the environmental review of that GLX phase 2. And that was a commitment made at the time of the MPO vote. And we have a letter from Secretary Pollack, then Secretary Pollack, in 2016 to that effect. At this time, the environmental review has not yet been completed, and we are trying to restart that process. And as you all know, a terminus for the Green Line at Route 16 would provide numerous opportunities, both for environmental justice communities, but also to a very dense area and improve air quality and mobility. I don't need to go through all of that with you here, but as GLX phase 1 is coming in on budget, funds are being returned to the cities of Somerville and Cambridge that put up funds for the project. And I request the MPO consider the use of reprogram funds for GLX phase 2, consider putting that back on the long range transportation plan, and also help ensure that the MEPA process does get restarted and is completed in a timely manner. So thank you so much. Thank you for listening and taking my public comment, and I appreciate all the work that all of you are doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative. So I see 3 people's hands raised. Ken, why don't you go first, and then I have Ms. Nichols and Ms. Ramakrishna. So Ken, why don't you go first?
Thank you. Ken Kraus. I'm a Medford resident and have been involved with the Medford Green Line Neighborhood Alliance and other transportation and environmental advocacy groups in Medford for the last 20 years or so. But first off, it's been a while since I attended a meeting, and I wanted to express my condolences to all the colleagues and friends of Carl Quackenbush, who passed away earlier this year. I attended many meetings of the MPO where Carl presented, and he was always very professional and courteous and thoughtful in listening and responding to questions and comments when he presented, and was always a steady steady hand at the helm of CTPS, and he'll be missed. I wanted to follow up on what Christine Barber mentioned in terms of supporting the MPO's request that the environmental impact report process be resumed and fulfilled in terms of the commitment that Mass DOT made back in 2016 when the funds were reprogrammed. The environmental review began in 2017. Notice of project change was issued, and a scope was issued by the Secretary of Environmental Affairs, but it's gone no farther. So as Christine said, with GLX Phase 1 coming to a close, the time is right to do that. And also significantly, in April, Cummings Properties, which owns a complex of buildings at the site of the Route 16 terminus, announced plans to build another building there, specifically a life sciences building. And they preface their remarks at the community meeting saying that the impetus for this new building was the report by MAPC in 2012 on the economic potential of maximizing the Green Line's benefits for that area. So I think it's significant that in addition to the scope that was determined for the study, this is a new building and a new aspect to the demand on transportation and jobs and other things in that area, and the expanding life sciences corridor there. That is another reason to look closely at this from the environmental impact standpoint. A couple other things that were new in the scope from the previous environmental impact study of Route 16 was not assuming that the U-Haul building, which is on the Somerville-Medford line and would be adjacent to the station, would be obtained and demolished and become a new station. It's to look at the building being complementary to that building and perhaps adaptive reuse for that building. So I think that's significant. And also the scope asks that the impact potentially on the Mystic River, which is next to the station as well, would be looked at in terms of the reduction of cars and pollution and other things. So the environmental impact report in this new phase is fairly more broad than initially was looked at. So I think it's important to take that step. And in addition to with the new building Cummings is planned, so it's just another wrinkle in there. So I would again hope that the MPO, which when it voted, insisted that the environmental impact study be continued and the review be continued at that point, remind Mass DOT that that was part of the agreement, and they would like to see that funded and completed as soon as possible. So thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Ms. Nichols?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, good morning. My name is Olivia Nichols, and I'm the transit justice organizer with Green Roots, an environmental justice community organization in Chelsea and East Boston. This morning, I would like to speak to the proposed congestion pricing study because traffic congestion is a chronic and often neglected issue that has affected EJ populations for years and years. In East Boston, residents live in incredibly close proximity to the Sumner and Callahan tunnels, through which people across the entire greater Boston area travel to and from Logan Airport. Chelsea is a geographically small and highly densely populated city that sits under the Tobin Bridge, which is a main thoroughfare for commuters from the North Shore entering Boston. We support MPO funding for a congestion pricing study because living adjacent to congested highways means living under daily circumstances of heightened air pollution compared to other areas of the state. We need to address the real health consequences congestion has on our EJ communities in informed and intentional ways. We need a pricing study that holistically analyzes solutions to congestion in the Commonwealth, including expanding transit options in locations with congested road corridors. The study should analyze strategies to mitigate impacts of a potential congestion pricing program on low and moderate income drivers, invest revenues in public transportation routes that provide alternatives to driving routes with pricing, and quantify the benefits and burdens to environmental justice populations. Thank you for taking my comment, and Green Roots is happy to meet with MPO and CTPS staff to discuss this study scope. Thank you again.
Thank you. All right, next we have Ms. Ramakrishna.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. My name is Sritha Ramakrishna, and I'm a policy analyst at Conservation Law Foundation. I would like to offer a comment on two issues today. The first is the MPO funding for a congestion study. I do echo the comments of the previous speaker from Green Roots. As we know, congestion affects environmental justice populations, those living adjacent to congested highways that divide communities and pollute air. Congestion also has been increasing to its pre-pandemic level. As we work to support a more equitable, efficient, and sustainable transportation network, we support MPO funding for a congestion study. It's as a concern through an extensive public process led to the 2018 Commission on the Future of Transportation report. And we do have a responsibility to the public to address it and are really looking to the regional MPO to show leadership on this. Again, echoing the previous comments where we do need a pricing study that analyzes to congestion and wealth, including expanding transit options in locations with those congested road corridors. And the study should also analyze strategies to mitigate the impacts of potential congestion pricing program on low and moderate income drivers. That's very important. And investing revenues in public transportation routes that provide alternatives to driving routes with pricing, as well as quantifying the burdens to environmental justice populations. We are similarly eager to meet with MPO and CTPS staff to discuss the study scope to make sure that these things are included. We also would like to offer on an item that's on the agenda, the Fair Change Equity Assessment. We just wanted to quickly note that the assessment should consider travel patterns as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially demographics that have fallen part of it, and should be included in any equity analysis. We would mostly like to understand further how the assessment will consider this and look forward to hearing more about this assessment later on in the agenda. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Just so I know, Brian put a message in the chat. So the congestion pricing stuff that's been brought up by the last two speakers, that's going to be an item next week, not next week, on the 15th, as Tegan pointed out, because that's when we'll consider the UPWP. So it's not a discussion point today, but obviously we're always welcome to hear public comments on anything, you know, in the end that relates to the MPO's work. So are there any other members of the public who would like to address the MPO today? I don't see any hand raised. And others, do you see anything?
Seeing none.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 5, which is committee chairs report. I know Ben has an update from the UPW committee. Are there any other chairs that have any updates or reports to the MPO today? I don't see any other than Ben right now. So Ben, why don't you start?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and morning, folks. So the UPWP committee met this morning to discuss a somewhat decreased budget for discrete studies for federal fiscal year 2022's UPWP. It was a pretty productive discussion centered largely on congestion pricing study that was just mentioned. So I recommend folks check out the recording when it's posted if you want to see what we've been talking about. We also committed the meeting again on July 15th before the MPO meeting to review the final draft UPWP for potential recommendation to release for public comment. So if you're interested in that, we'll see you there. Thanks.
All right, any other chairs have any updates? All right, I don't see any hands raised. So why don't we move to agenda item 6, which is the Regional Transportation Advisory Council report. Leonard, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so last, I guess it was June 9th, we had Mark Reichman from BU talk with us about active transportation and the benefits of that. And it was even better than I thought it would be. And so the YouTube video, I'm sure is up. Please take a look at it if you're at all interested. And in this coming month, we're going to have our own Ann McGann, and please forgive me for butchering the guest from MAPC, her name, Emily Torres Cullinane. And it's really going to be a follow-up on a presentation that was done to the board here regarding the Metro Common 2050 plans and how it fits in with the LRTP. So if you didn't have a chance to ask your questions, then please come to our meeting and you can ask as many questions as you want. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Leonard. Any questions for Leonard? Eric, I see your hand raised. Was it for now or for the committee chair's report?
It was actually for the committee chair's report. I wanted to give an update on the cost increase committee, but if anyone has questions for Len, take those first.
Okay, just again, any questions for Leonard? All right, please catch out the recordings Leonard talked about. We'll move back to Agenda 5 really quickly. Eric, go ahead.
So we've had two meetings of the MPO sort of cost increase ad hoc committee. We've had a great conversation about what do we think are some of the things that are driving cost increases. MPO staff put together a phenomenal presentation kind of looking at examples of projects and sort of looking at some data that MassDOT has collected on what are the places where we often see cost increases occurring. And one of the places we've really focused in on is the amount of change in cost that occurs from when a project is approved by the PRC committee and then when it basically advances to the 25% design. And so there's a big increase. That's a time when projects often go up in cost. And as folks know, we approve a lot of projects that are essentially pre 25% design. So that's a place where we're kind of zeroing in on for potential policy recommendations. We had some great conversation about other ideas too, around even potentially the MPO contributing to design costs. Some broader topics too around how to maybe even increase the amount of projects that could be funded by the MPO through cost sharing and things like that. But we're having our next meeting on July 8th. We're gonna dig more down into that sort of PRC to 25% design cost issue. We're gonna look a little deeper at incorporating some type of cost benefit into our process and what exact examples of that could be. And we're also going to be looking at how, what are procedures that could be put in place for staff to have kind of more touch points and more communication with project proponents to make sure that not only are we following projects closely, but that the project proponents are aware that they need to be getting information in and they need to be advancing their projects in a timely manner. So those are some of the three main topics we're going to have for the next meeting, and we'll kind of take it from there with the hope of bringing something back to the full MPO in like the September timeframe.
All right, any questions for Eric? All right, I don't see any. So I think that puts us at agenda item 7, which is an action item. Our first ever action item was approval of meeting minutes. I guess we have 2 sets, so we'll take them each separately. Daniel, do you have a question about what Eric just said, or?
No, this is about the minutes for April 29th. I just have a correction.
All right, let me get a motion a second, then we'll do the correction, okay?
Okay, I'll move approval.
All right, can I get a second for the April 29th minutes? I believe that's, well, it's either Thatcher or Tom. You guys can fight it amongst yourselves. I think I saw Thatcher's hand raised first, so I'll get you next, Tom. So, all right, Daniel, do you want to do your change of the minutes for April 29th? Any corrections?
Yes, just quickly on something that I spoke about. It's on page 5, agenda item 9, where I had asked about it was related to the low cost improvements project. I think it was just a clarification that I think from the previous iteration of that in 2014, a consultant was used to provide the recommendations for the low-cost improvements, not the low-cost improvements themselves. I think that's clarified later on in the paragraph, but just to be clear, that was recommendations for those low-cost improvements, not the actual improvements.
All right, so we'll make that change. Any other changes or comments on the minutes of the 29th? All right, so minutes with Daniel's change. Ann, you want to read the roll?
Sure. MassDOT Chair,
Yes.
MassDOT Seat 2,
John Bouchard, yes.
MassDOT Highway, is John Romano still here? Okay. MAPC,
Yes. Sorry.
John Romano, that was a yes, right? Okay, MAPC,
And MAPC, Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Brian Kane, yes.
Advisory Council,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
City of Boston BTD,
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston BPDA,
Jim Fitz, yes.
City at-large City Everett. Oh, sorry, Jay's not here. At-large City Newton,
All right, David Kozis, yes.
at-large Town Brookline,
Todd Corain, yes.
thank you. Intercore Somerville,
Tom Bent, yes.
Metro West Framingham,
Thatcher Keys votes yes.
North Shore Beverly,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
and Trick Norwood, the Chamber.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
That calls the roll.
And I believe we may have missed Arlington.
Oh, I'm sorry. At-large Town Arlington.
Daniel M. Stutz, yes.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ann. Thanks, everyone. So now can I get a motion second for the May 6th minutes? All right, so see Darlene's hand raised. Darlene, are you making the motion?
I can. I make a motion to approve the May 6 minutes.
All right, is there a second?
Tom Bent, I'll second.
All right, any changes or comments on the May 6 minutes? I don't see anyone's hands raised. Ann, you want to read the roll, please?
Great. MassDOT Chair,
Yes.
MassDOT Seat 2,
John Bouchard, yes.
MassDOT Highway,
John Romano, yes.
MAPC,
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Brian Kane, yes.
Advisory Council,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
City of Boston BTD,
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston BPDA,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
at-large City Newton,
David Kozis, yes.
at-large Town Arlington,
Daniel M. Stutz, yes.
at-large Town Brookline,
Todd Corain, yes.
Intercore Somerville,
Tom Bent, yes.
Metro West Framingham,
Thatcher Keys votes yes.
North Shore Beverly,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
and Trick Norwood Chamber.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
And that calls the roll.
All right, thanks, everyone. Thank you, Ann. Let's move on to action item 8, which is the state fiscal year 2022 Central Transportation Planning Staff operating budget. So I believe this is Brian, Tina, and Haral. So why don't you guys go ahead?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll kick it off. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My fellow members, CTPS staff, members of the public. As is mentioned, I'm Brian Kane. I'm the co-chair of the Administration and Finance Committee, along with Tina Cassidy of Woburn. Tina wouldn't usually be giving this this presentation, but she felt like I needed some practice public speaking, so I'm very grateful to her for that. And on behalf of the committee, we're here to present the state fiscal year 22 operating budget for CTPS. I want to start by thanking Haral for all of her really hard work. The numbers on this change in real time, and she and her team have done a great job keeping up on top of things. Special thanks as well to Tegan and to Gina Perel for their guidance and answering all of the questions that certainly myself and members of the ANF committee have had. As I mentioned, this is for state fiscal year 22, which actually begins today and will end on June 30th, 2022. The ANF committee met with budget staff on June 17th formally, and this was sort of at the end of long individual processes to review the budget request, test assumptions, query estimates, and review the budget numbers and what the staff was requesting. The state fiscal year 22 CTPS operating budget is balanced with revenue and expense of $6,679,650. This amount is 3% greater than the fiscal 21 budget by about $231,000. And it should be noted that spending in the current, and I guess last fiscal year now, fiscal 21, has been well managed and is projected to wrap up at a 10% below budget threshold. So strong management, paying attention to the bottom line, paying attention to spending has worked. And especially in this past year when there's been lots of moving parts due to the pandemic, this is something that should be heralded. So budgeting at the best of times at CTPS is a moving target because of the way its overhead rate is calculated. And, you know, it is a moving target, as I mentioned. This fiscal budget it will support 58 positions, which is something that I think we all agree is really important. And it should be noted that as of today, there are 3 vacancies at the organization. In addition, the budget supports salary increases for staff, as well as fully funds a computer plan that has been in the works for many, well, I should say for some time. And this funding will support a changing IT infrastructure resulting from changing work types and can support hybrid and remote working with laptops for those that qualify and want them and meet the requirements as opposed to desktops. Folks here know that I spend a lot of time working on budgets, and budgets, I've always said, are a statement of principle and policy. And, you know, CTPS is most important asset is its people. This budget, you know, fully supports those people, which make the MPO work, which make a lot of the transportation policies in this region work. It supports them. It supports their ability to work. It supports their ability to commute if they need to, or work remotely if they need to. It is a strong budget. And I also just want to note that the ANF committee has morphed in the last year. We've gone from meeting pretty much once a year. We meet now quarterly with Haral and her team to not only look at the budget projections, but look at spending on a quarterly basis. So we are staying on top of spending as well as projecting revenue and expense. And I am very happy to recommend to each of you that this budget be approved. I certainly plan on supporting it and would suggest that if there are any technical questions that Haral or Tegan or Gina could answer them, but really, this is a strong document, a strong principle, and a strong statement of support in the CTPS staff. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, I muted myself. Brian, is anyone else going to talk, or were you just giving the presentation and we're just opening it to any questions?
Unless Haral or Tina or Gina want to speak, I would open it up to questions, sir.
All right. Any of those individuals want to speak, or you just want to open up to questions? All right, looks like, so Brian, you're making the motion or the recommendation?
I will certainly move approval, Mr. Chair.
All right, is there someone like the second, and we can ask, and then if there's more questions. Leonard, are you making the second, or you have a question?
I'm making the second.
All right. Any folks have any questions for Brian, Tina, Haral, Tegan, Gina? I don't see any questions. Ann, others, do you see anything? Any questions? All right, and do you want to go ahead and read the roll?
Great. MassDOT Chair.
Oh, Eric, did you have a question, or are you just raising hands? All right. The answer is yes.
MassDOT Seat 2.
John Bouchard, yes.
MassDOT Highway.
John Romano, yes.
MAPC.
MAPC, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board.
Brian Kane, yes.
Advisory Council.
Leonard Higgins, yes.
City of Boston, BTD.
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston, BPDA.
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
At-large City Newton.
David Kozis, yes.
At-large Town Arlington.
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
At-large Town Brookline.
Todd Corain, yes.
Inner Core Somerville.
Tom Bent, yes.
Metro West Framingham.
Chiquiza votes yes.
North Shore Beverly.
Sorry, I was not paying attention. This is Darlene.
Are you voting?
I got distracted, so I just saw that I was unmuted.
So are you voting?
I'm going to abstain.
Abstain, okay. And Trick Norwood Chamber.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
That calls the roll.
All right. Thank you, everyone. On behalf of the MPO, I want to thank Brian and Tina, Haral and her team, and Tegan and Gina for getting the budget in place for this year. So with that, let's move to agenda item 9, which is on our last action item of today. It's a scope of work on the equity analysis for MPO State Fiscal Year 2023 fare changes. And I'll turn it over to Emily.
Hi. Hi, I'm Emily Domanico, and today I will be presenting a work plan for the state fiscal year 2023 fare equity analysis work that CTPS will conduct for the MPTA. We expect this work to take 7 months with an additional 5 months in the schedule for ongoing technical support. And we expect this work will cost just over $52,000 and it will be funded through a contract with the MPTA. CTPS has done fare equity analyses for the MPTA for more than 25 years. The primary objective of this work will be to forecast ridership, revenue, and equity impacts for the MPTA's fare structure and tariff changes for state fiscal year 2023. Task 1 for this work will be to meet with the MPTA and get direction on potential scenarios for fare structure and tariff changes. Task 2 will be for CTPS to model the ridership and revenue impacts for potential changes in the fare structure and tariff policy for up to 2 scenarios. To do this work as appropriate, we will update and use FARET, the Fare Elasticity, Ridership, and Revenue Estimation tool. FARET is a model that takes 2 primary inputs. The first is unlinked trips for each fare product type, and the second is changes in fare structure. The model then applies demand elasticities to forecast ridership and revenue based on proposed fare changes. There are various potential fare structure changes that cannot be modeled in FARET, and as necessary, CTPS will work with the MBTA to determine alternative methods to model ridership and revenue impacts for those fare changes. Then task 3 is to model the Title VI and environmental justice impacts for the fare policy on different socioeconomic groups in accordance with FTA requirements. Similar to other Title VI work at CTPS, this analysis will evaluate the effects of the proposed changes on minority and low-income populations. Task 4 is to produce a draft memo of the two scenarios modeled. Task 5 is to update the results of the analysis to accommodate fare structure changes that may result through the MBTA's public process. And finally, task 6 is to create a final memo that reflects the MBTA's selected fare change scenario for implementation. With that, I'm happy to field your questions.
All right, can I get a motion, a second, to approve this work scope? Then I'll open up to questions. Daniel, you had your hand raised first. I can't tell if Eric has his hand raised. Brian, you had your hand raised. So Daniel, why don't you go first?
I do have a question, but I'll make a motion and grab a question in a moment.
All right, is there a second?
I will second the motion, but I also have some questions.
All right, so we'll go Daniel, Eric, and Brian. Did you still have a question?
Yes.
All right, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is that the UPWP committee had considered a discrete study for this coming year related to fare policy and to do some, I guess, some research or some work on considering other types of fare structures for telecommuting and I guess people that work at different hours or I guess different maybe passes that they could get besides sort of like standard monthly passes or something of those of that kind. So I'm just curious if this work would incorporate any of that at all, or whether this is fairly standard from previous work done for the MBTA.
Sure. My understanding is that this work is focused primarily on scenarios and fare changes that the MBTA plans to implement. So they're not in the researching and discovery phase. They're in the we want to do this phase. And to that end, if there is general restructuring that they're ready to implement and they want analyzed, then I think we will incorporate some of that. But as for direct crossover, I'm not quite sure. I think it's rather separate, and we work with the MBTA to develop their scenarios that they're choosing. Does that respond correctly?
Yeah, that's sort of what I was expecting. So thank you.
Good
All right, Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I know that ultimately, we're approving, your support to the T, which we absolutely want CTPS and the MPO to be able to do in investigating, fare changes. Does anyone know, is there anyone from the MBTA here or Steve, do you all know, are they thinking about a fare change for like revenue increase or more about fare changes for like kind of meeting, like trying to increase ridership, meeting the changes that are happening because of COVID? Because I guess I would say I'm very concerned about just thinking about a fare increase for revenue and not thinking about it in the terms of how are we kind of encouraging ridership and changing based on just changing travel patterns.
So Eric, I don't believe Jillian's here. I believe she's out this week. And I haven't seen the scope and I haven't heard anything about it up until now. So I don't know, maybe that's a question that we can bring up, at the next meeting with Jillian to see, get some more guidance. I don't think anyone from the T other than Jillian's here, right, Ann? I don't believe anyone's here. Does that make sense, Eric? So we can ask that question then?
Yeah, I mean, I see Brian like nodding his head. So maybe Brian even has some information he could provide.
All right, Brian, you want to go ahead?
Sure, I can note that, publicly available documents from their pro forma published last March state that they are not seeking a fare increase prior to, I think, 2025. So I think this is more, and this is what my comment was going to be, this is more allowing CTPS staff to work with T staff to come up with concepts and ideas and see what may or may not work and allow CTPS staff to be able to sort of kick the tires with the model on what may or may not work. And as someone who's done a fare increase process for the T, I can tell you it's invaluable to be able to kind of go to the CTPS folks and get their expertise and their sense of how things might work. So this is a really important thing. And I don't think, the MPO is necessarily endorsing a fair policy by doing this. I think it's just important that we sort of give the CTPS staff the scope to go and talk to the T about what may or may not work. Thanks.
Eric, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I guess I would just note the title says equity analysis for MBTA state fiscal year 2023 fare changes. So the title of this work implies that they are making fare changes in 2023. So again, I hope you're right that it's not a fair, a revenue raising increase, but but looking at ways of making, changes that might be about encouraging ridership. So in some cases, it might be actually decreasing fares and changing them, or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the control board voted to not do a fare increase anytime soon. Plus, there's a new body coming on, so I doubt the new board would do a fare increase their first year.
So they voted not to do one until 2025. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it, but yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Brian, did you have a question or comment?
I said my comment, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, Leonard and then David.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, may I interrupt? I think there is somebody on staff who actually did have a little bit more to contribute to that.
Okay.
So
Go ahead.
Paul, I think, is trying to unmute without raising his hand, so you might not have seen it. Can anybody unmute Paul? Huh. There we go.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Tegan. Sorry, I wasn't able to unmute. I just wanted to comment, that there's any number, we've had a lot of conversations with the T about this, and we're talking about this as well as they're embarking on ASC 2.0, and we're doing some analysis for them on that. And there's any number of fare changes that could happen from, it could even be, fare reductions and figuring out how that affects things. So I don't think it's quite clear yet because we're a ways out from it. So the scope changes can be in either direction. So I wouldn't make any assumptions at this point, considering how far we are from it. And we sort of a list that we're discussing with them, and nothing is definite yet, and it'll become clear over the next several months as we discuss more.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Leonard, go ahead, and then David.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to point out something technical, and Brian kind of alluded to it. In the second paragraph of task 1, it mentions that it will meet with members of the FMCB, and so as Brian noted, they no longer exist. And so I'm sure you would catch this yourself later on, but it's just something you might want to change and note that whatever it's going to be, that's who we'll consult with. And the second thing is I am so happy to see the ferret still around. It's Stephen Andrews's creation, and every time I see it, I remember when it first came out or when he first developed it, so it's good to see it's still alive and kicking. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thanks, Leonard. David, and then Brian.
So as an example, if the T wanted to come up with a new type of pass, like a 15 ride pass or a 10 ride pass at a discount, something that offers flexibility that's popular in other places. That kind of thing is something that CTPS could help to examine from an equity point of view as part of this study. Is that those type of changes, right?
I believe so, yeah. It might not strictly fall within the guidelines of Ferret because it's a new fare product and Ferret likes existing fare products. So we would work with the T to come up with a strategy to analyze the equity implications of that.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
All right, Brian.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I wanted to just cite my source because I found it, and I think it's been sent out on the chat. So the control board voted on December 14th, 2020. This is page 7 of the link that just went out. tied future fare increases to bus and rapid transit levels to ridership. Basically, the T is not projecting a fare increase in any of its budget pro forma documents, which is its budgets for the next sort of 5-year projections for 23 or 25. So there are no fare increases in the next at least 4 fiscal year budgets that they are putting in place. I would also note that this document suggests that they have significant and sufficient federal funds from the various pandemic packages to balance the budget through at least fiscal 24, assuming ridership returns at some point between 24 and 25. So this is, I think it's fair to say that this document certainly makes it clear to me, at least, that the budget department at the T and the T leadership is not suggesting any kind of a fare increase, at least until fiscal 25, which would be July of 2024. And even beyond that. So I think we're looking at 26 before there'd be any sort of a change. But I do think that David's comments are important and has been stated that if they did want to make any other changes that would lower fares by anything more than 10%, they'd have to go through an equity analysis process, which is where this work with CTPS would kick in. And I do think it's important that we give staff the leverage and the leeway to work with the T on these sort of things. Thanks.
So we have one question from the public, but before I take that, are there any other questions from board members first? All right. Okay, I don't see any. All right, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, so I understand this is just like the scope, so there may not be details at this level or of this nature, but I was just curious, like, as far as the equity analysis goes, like, if there is a sense of like what the basis might be as far as looking at demographics. I mean, it was soon to ask this question, but I was just curious as far as like ridership survey or American Community Survey data, and getting a sense of like how this equity analysis will take into account these changed ridership patterns. And it's okay to not an answer to that right now.
Yeah, I don't think we have an answer to that right now. We definitely need the funding to start investigating it. We're very aware that ridership has changed, and we have access to, the MBTA has ongoing survey panels that they do, that we have methods that we could try to augment the analysis, or at least have a section where we consider that. But we would need to get into it to really figure out what the appropriate method is. Yeah.
All right, anyone else with their hands raised?
Yeah,
Eric,
Steve,
go ahead.
but just to be clear, Emily, the type of equity analysis that's done is really about meeting the federal requirements, which is essentially making sure that if you're changing fares, that you're not now disproportionate, that like you're not like the fare is like an equal change across the board. So it's not like suddenly low income communities of color are paying at a disproportionately level higher than like suburban white communities or something like that. Like that's what the equity analysis is focused, is that the change is sort of like an equal change across the board in some manner, right, Emily?
Exactly. Yeah, it takes demographic information tied to trip patterns, and it makes sure that the fare changes don't disproportionately affect the trip patterns made by low income and minority people.
All right. Anyone else have any questions? All right, I don't see any. So Ann, why don't you read the roll, please?
MassDOT Chair,
Yes.
MassDOT Seat 2, is John Bouchard still here?
Might want to circle back. He's not having issues unmuting at the moment.
Okay. MassDOT Highway,
John Romano, yes.
And John, but
MAPC?
I'm sorry, John Bouchard just unmuted. Sorry.
Sorry, I had to get another call. John Bouchard, yes.
Thank you.
Apologize.
MAPC,
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Brian Kane, yes.
Advisory Council,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
City of Boston BTD,
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston BPDA,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
at-large City Newton,
David Kozis, yes.
at-large Town Arlington,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
at-large Town Brookline,
Todd Corain, yes.
Intercore Somerville,
Tom Bent, yes.
Metro West Framingham,
Chiquiza votes yes.
North Shore Beverly,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
and Trick Norwood Neponset Chamber.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
That calls the roll.
All right, thank you, Emily and Paul. All right, we're on to agenda item 10, which is member items. Any members have any items for the MPO today? I don't see anyone's hands raised. So I guess I would ask for a motion a sec. Oh, Brian, did you have something or you're doing? Is this adjournment? We're moving towards adjournment? All right, so
Move
Brian.
to
you want-
adjourn, Mr. Chair.
And it looks like Eric, you're the second. All right, and you want to call the roll?
Second it.
Without objection.
I don't think we usually do a roll for adjournment if you would like to adjourn without objection.
Yeah, we've been
Unless staff
doing,
want to correct me.
if anyone objects, raise your hand. That's what we've been doing.
See,
There you
everyone
go.
does it, every MPO does it differently. I can never guess who does what. It's crazy, but all right, so we'll dispense with the roll call. Any objects adjourning? Seeing none, all in favor say aye, opposed. All right, we're adjourned.
Happy Independence
Thank
Day,
you, everyone.
everybody.
See you in
Take
2
care.
weeks.